As we begin this unit on civil rights and civil liberties, it's something that kids tend to usually find um, interesting and engaging because it's a topic that has so many different conversations and so many different directions that we can go with it, and really lends itself to a lot of debate. But in order to understand that debate, we do have to take a look at the differences between civil rights and civil liberties. These are two terms that are oftentimes used synonymously, and in any other situation outside of AP government, I would allow you to use them synonymously. In fact, we were talking about it in US history a couple of years ago, and I was like, no, we need to make sure we distinguish between the two. And the other US history teachers didn't even realize there was a difference between the two. And I don't say that to mock their intelligence or anything. It's just outside of AP government, outside of political science, people really do kind of confuse what these two terms mean. So the two definitions are there. I think they're very good for you, and I think they're very clear. And then we'll kind of break these down and talk about them a little bit more. Civil rights are the basic right to be free from unequal treatment based on certain protected characteristics in settings such as employment and housing. So race, gender, disability, age, any of those are going to be our civil rights issues. Civil liberties are basic rights and freedoms that are guaranteed either explicitly identified in the Bill of Rights or interpreted through the years by courts and lawmakers. And one of those examples that you will see when it talks about interpreted through the years by courts and lawmakers is the right to privacy. The word privacy does not show up in the Constitution ever, but the Supreme Court has interpreted certain amendments as creating a right to privacy. So the right to privacy exists simply because the Supreme Court has made that interpretation. In this slide, just to give you some examples of what a civil liberty is, civil liberties are essentially those things that are in the first 10 amendments to the Constitution. Speech, privacy, as I said, was even though it is not in there. The Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. The Fifth Amendment, due process, speedy trial, free from protection of excessive punishment or excessive bail or anything like that. The right to marry, the right to vote. These are all civil liberties. So these are things that are kind of established through our Constitution and through our government. Another good way to determine and distinguish between the two, civil liberties are protections of citizens from unwarranted government action. So civil liberties are protections from unwarranted government action. Civil rights describe the government's responsibility to protect citizens. So if you're looking at it from the lens of how government is involved, it's looking at it from two different ways. Civil liberties is trying to stop government from getting involved and saying, you can't take this right away, or you can take this right away. This liberty away, or you can take this liberty away, or you can't take this liberty away. When it comes to civil rights, you're talking about the ability of the government to make sure that everybody is treated equally. So it's their job to kind of get involved in civil rights issues, but in civil liberties issues, they're supposed to kind of stay out. So just kind of looking at it from a different lens rather than a definition of what they are, looking at it from the standpoint of the role of government as it plays out in our society. With civil liberties cases, we're typically talking about freedom versus order. So we're looking at the right of the citizen, but also the job of the government to maintain order. And that is a constant balancing act. So civil liberties conflicts typically are an individual against the government, where an individual is trying to express some sort of freedom that they have, say the freedom of speech, and the government or some sort of government agency is trying to stop that from happening. The other one could be the government seeking to keep order, but you also have to preserve the rights of others. And an example of that would be the issues that we talk about with guns. There are a lot of people in our country that believe that they have a right to own an assault weapon or a semi-automatic weapon. However, the government's job is to maintain order and to protect citizens. So there's that balance that has to take place of the individual's right to own a weapon and the right of the government to protect and keep order and maintain order. And that's where that civil liberty conflict comes in. The other way that you could have conflict with civil liberties is when two liberties are competing. And the example that I think of with that is a few years ago, there was a baker out in California, or not California, Colorado, who had made all these elaborate wedding cakes. And they designed them, they iced them, they did the typical like cake boss kind of thing for each wedding cake. Well, this couple, this gay couple comes in and they want to have a wedding cake made at this place, and this baker denies them their um, their wedding cake. He says, "I'll make anything else, but I'm not making this wedding cake." And they take it to the Supreme Court because the question was, it wasn't necessarily a religious issue. It was actually the right that was established by the Supreme Court of gay marriage with the right of artistic expression combining. And so it was the right of artistic expression versus the right of gay marriage, and which one won. I believe it was actually the artistic expression in that case won, and they did not have to provide that. But two liberties can also conflict. You could have freedom of speech against freedom of religion. Whose right is more, not necessarily more important, but who's going to be ruled in that particular instance? With civil rights, you're looking at are private businesses free to hire? You're looking at more of a distinction between freedom versus equality. So, can private businesses hire and promote whoever they want? You take a situation like the NFL. Um, in the NFL, they would have a job opening and they would just open it up to everybody. And what that resulted in was an increase in white coaches in the NFL. So now the NFL has a policy to try and promote a little bit more equality, where you are required when a coaching position opens up to at least interview one minority candidate per opening. So are they free to hire? No. Well, yes, I'm sorry, excuse me. They are free to hire whoever they want. They are not free to interview whoever they want. They have to interview somebody that is a minority candidate. So there's a little bit of freedom taken away, but the intent is to promote more of that equality. Are universities free to admit whomever they want? Well, the one that always sticks out with students is what happens if, like, African American scholarships. Well, the intent of those African American scholarships, or scholarships aimed at particular minority groups, is to increase their participation in post secondary education. So the intent is to increase equality in our post secondary schools. And it is taking away some of that freedom of the university to pick and choose who they want to bring in. And it really is kind of balance. It's a balancing act. And I always talk about this from the standpoint of a business. If you have 100% freedom, you will not have equality. And if you have 100% equality, you will not have freedom. And an example would be looking at something as simple as a Barleycorns or a Panera, or any of these local restaurants that we have around here. Um, if a business has 100% freedom, then they can come in and they can say, I'm not going to allow X group of people in. We're not going to allow African Americans. We're not going to allow people over the age of 65. We're not going to allow women, whatever, into our establishment. That is 100% freedom. Well, when you have that freedom, and I'm not saying businesses would do that today, but if you have that freedom, then there's a chance that that equality goes away. However, on the opposite side, if you tell a company that they have to do something in the name of equality, then it takes away their freedom. So if it says you have to allow these people in, then they do not have the freedom to choose a certain practice within their business. And we'll talk about some other examples of that in class, but I just want to illustrate that a little bit more with you so that you can see that difference between freedom and equality. And then really the last thing for you in this particular lecture is just know the Bill of Rights. Know the rights that are in there, especially when it comes to civil liberties. I think it's very important to know, all of this, that you know specifically what is there and what rights and liberties that you do have. There are certain amendments on here that you will not need to know, like the Third Amendment quartering of troops. That I don't believe has ever showed up on an AP exam. So I don't think that that's something that you need to necessarily focus on. Fourth Amendment, search and seizure, that will show up. First Amendment, speech, press, religion, that will show up. 10th Amendment, reserved powers, that will show up. So just know them 1 through 10. These are the amendments to the Constitution, and just make sure that you at least know the right or the liberty that goes with that particular amendment. And as always, if you have any questions, please let me know.